The efficacy of any national budget is really judged on neutral economic facts alone. It's filtered through pre existing biases, hopes, and fears of its audience. And the Autumn Budget 2025, delivered by Chancellor Rachel Reeves, was no exception. For the UK construction sector, a vast ecosystem comprising giant contractors, small family run firms, and millions of individual tradespeople, the balance sheet was decided long before the Chancellor stood up. It was defined by whether one's personal or commercial interest was being served or sacrificed. For every measure welcomed by one segment of the industry, a contradictory fear was immediately voiced by another. And perhaps the most potent immediate contradiction is that of the labour cost increase. For the individual worker, the announcement of an increase in the legal minimum wage was probably positive news. The national living wage for over 21s will rise by 4.1% to £12.71 per hour in April, while the rate for 18 to 20-year-olds will jump 8.5% to £10.85 per hour, moving towards a single rate for all adults. Furthermore, minimum wages for 16 to 17-year-olds and apprentices will increase by 6% to £8 an hour. Now, those increases represent at least a degree of relief for low-paid workers grappling with persistent inflationary pressures. Yet, this relief for the employee immediately translated into a massive blow for the employer. Philip Pepper, employment partner at law firm Shakespeare Martineau, stated that this move was unexpected, especially coming so soon after a previous increase, and arrives concurrently with material costs remaining higher than ever. For the supply chain, the reaction was characterised by deep anxiety. Lee Wilcox, CEO and co-founder of On the Tools, spoke for the community, noting that higher wage bills, increased national insurance and frozen tax thresholds all squeeze the brickies, sparkies and plumbers already operating on wafer-thin margins. And that squeeze is not theoretical. Sean Keyes, Chief Executive Officer of Engineering Consultants at Sutcliffe, stated that these costs do not simply disappear into company accounts. Instead, firms face painful choices concerning recruitment, constrained pay rises for other staff, and the necessity to reprice existing projects. Keyes highlighted the core paradox. You cannot simultaneously increase the cost of employment while calling for economic growth. Something has to give. This fundamental tension means that the policy seen as social progress by the government risks triggering rises in restructuring, refinance, or exits entirely among small businesses, according to Julie Palmer, partner at restructuring specialist Begbie's Trainer. The contradictory responses were not just limited to labour costs either. They permeated the government's overall fiscal strategy. On one hand, the Chancellor's objective was clearly to ensure the government's finances appear on a firm footing, underpinned by a £26 billion package of tax increases. Well, that stability, however, came at the expense of discouraging private sector investment. Alan Wyland, economics director at Glenigan, stressed that while a firm financial footing was necessary, it's vital that the government doesn't damage already fragile investor confidence. Wyland warned that the plethora of new taxes announced by the Chancellor may deter private sector investment and ultimately frustrate growth objectives. A prime example of a measure that pleased the Treasury but dismayed business owners was the freezing of national insurance and income tax thresholds until 2031. That mechanism, which increases tax revenue without raising headline rates, is expected to drag around 780,000 more people into paying income tax by 2029, according to the Office for Budget Responsibility. Robin Clevitt, Fixed Radio show host, described this as a triple whammy alongside rising wages and business costs. A more targeted hit was aimed at contractors seeking to exit their businesses responsibly. Employee ownership trusts, a popular mechanism for demolition and construction firm owners to sell their company to their staff, currently benefit from a 100% capital gains tax relief. But Rachel Reeves announced this relief would be immediately reduced to 50%, saving £3.5 billion over the next 6 years. This has been a popular exit plan in demolition circles these past few years, so while this move might be fiscally prudent for the state, it potentially adds more uncertainty at the top end of the industry. And this high-end disruption contrasted sharply with the government's failure to address the struggles of SME house builders. Phil Hooper, CEO of Close Brothers Property Finance, expressed extreme disappointment that no new equity loan scheme was introduced to support smaller developers. While volume house builders can afford to launch their own sales incentives, SMEs can't, meaning the gap between them is only going to grow wider at this rate, he says. In housing, the budget prioritised political optics, taxing the rich, and large-scale contractor projects, the Lower Thames Crossing for £891 million, while ignoring the tailored financial intervention necessary to support the SMEs crucial for diversifying housing output. And a third major area of contradiction emerged in environmental policy, creating conflicting incentives across the built environment lifecycle. The most controversial element was the abolition of the Energy Company Obligation Scheme. RICS Chief Executive Justin Young confirmed that commitments to sustainability appear to be weakening, stating this decision has the potential to hamper the country's ambition to tackle the UK's retrofit burden. For those focused on creating high-paying jobs for the future through retrofitting existing homes to meet net emission targets, this was a clear defeat. However, on the flip side, that retreat from deep retrofit could be interpreted as a subtle win for the sectors whose business models rely on demolition, new construction, waste disposal, rather than complex preservation work. And that interpretation is strengthened by the short-term landfill tax reprieve. After listening to representations, the Chancellor decided not to proceed at this time with converging the two rates of landfill tax. This relief, which retains the low rate at £4.05p per tonne for inert materials, protects house builders from unavoidable costs, at least for now. However, the government immediately announced a consultation proposing to transition to a single rate of landfill tax by 2030, which is just 4 and a bit years away. David Gudgeon, head of external affairs at Reconomy Connect, cautioned that this future shift will be a major blow to the house building sector, relying heavily on the lower rate, possibly becoming the straw that breaks the camel's back. In other words, the budget offered temporary cost benefits now, but introduced a highly costly policy certainty for the near future. Ultimately, the contradictory nature of the budget often obscured the human reality of the sector. While the £820 million youth guarantee and free apprenticeship training for SMEs were welcomed as green shoots that could strengthen the regional skills pipeline, even this positive measure was met with scepticism by Robin Clevitt, who argued you can't grow the next generation of builders if the tax system keeps stripping cash from the very businesses expected to train and employ them. As Lee Wilcox concluded, the budget still fails to confront is that tradespeople are people first, working in a sector with some of the highest suicide rates in the UK. He emphasised that true growth demands that mental health, job security and late payment issues sit centrally in the national conversation, not just the financial calculus of tax and skills. So, in summary, the 2025 budget was less a unified strategy and more a collection of contradictory policy demands reflecting the competing interests and political pressures the government faces. It may have delivered to the Treasury's balance sheet at the expense of stability for small businesses, offered short-term cost relief for house builders while deterring long-term investment, and prioritised new construction over the critical but unglamorous challenge of retrofitting. But did we really expect anything else?